Why are ocarinas so obscure? In most of the world outside of like Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan, most people don't know what an ocarina is. If I were to pick a random street in America and start playing the ocarina, the most common response I would get is, "What is that?" More than 90% of passersby would not know what an ocarina is. Whereas when I've done the exact same thing in Japan, the opposite result was true. Ocarinas are an obscure, niche instrument in most of the world. Let's try to understand why. But first, make sure you're subscribed. By the end of this video, you will understand why ocarinas are so niche and why you should hit that big red button. Can we verify that the ocarina is actually obscure? Yes. Let's dive into Google Trends for hard data and even harder realities. So if we compare ocarinas to recorders, which are the most similar instruments in terms of sound and niche, you'll see recorders absolutely dominate them. Over the last 12 months, recorders have been searched nearly 5 times more than ocarinas, on average. The spike right here in July would account for Freckled Zelda's appearance on America's Got Talent, but even then, the search volume for ocarinas is less than half of that of recorders, on the highest day for ocarinas this year. And if we zoom out to 2004, you'll see that the recorder has gotten less popular, but the ocarina has remained about the same, with recorders averaging nearly a 7 times lead over ocarinas in terms of search volume. And if we zoom these results even farther from the United States to the entire world, the results still look about the same. But ocarinas are even less favorable compared to recorders in terms of popularity. And this isn't just the term ocarina or the term recorder. This is specifically queries for the musical instruments. But if we switch this view to be Japan instead of the world, a very different story appears. Recorders are still a little bit more popular in Japan, but ocarinas are nearly just as known. And if we want even more proof that ocarinas are incredibly niche, let's add piano to the mix. As you can see, the search results for piano dwarf the results for recorder, which then dwarf the results for ocarina in the world. So yeah, the data proves that ocarinas are a very niche instrument around the entire world, aside from maybe Japan, South Korea, and a couple other countries. But did you think we were done looking at data? There's a lot more data we can look at, and we can use it to tell the story of the ocarina. As you saw with Google Trends, we only went back to as early as 2004. But with another tool, the Google Ngram viewer, we can go to any literary reference for basically all of recorded history. So let's go back to 1853, when Giuseppe Donati invented the modern ocarina in Budrio, Italy. First off, this isn't as specific as Google Trends. Google Trends will specifically filter it for queries about the instrument of the ocarina. This is simply the term ocarina used in any sense. So judging by the spike upward in the 90s, you can kind of tell that's when ocarina was used a lot more because of media like Ocarina of Time. But how did we get to that point? The first major spike is here in 1877. I don't know exactly what the cause is, but I can explain every spike that happens afterward. Right here in the 1920s is around when Takashi Akutagawa invented the 12-hole ocarina. The 12-hole was invented in 1928, but it was probably invented because the ocarina was gaining more popularity worldwide in places like Japan, hence the spikes leading up to 1928. Next, the biggest non-Zelda related spike is in 1943. During World War II, many US servicemen were provided ocarinas as a little morale booster in their kits. Basically to play music, do some team building, have some fun, something other than the warfare to worry about. So this caused the ocarina to explode in popularity in the United States around that time, though it was generally referred to as the sweet potato. In fact, in 1946, a popular musical group called The Foursome released an ocarina album. This was called the Sweet Potato Tutors. All the nomenclature is a little silly for back then, but this group did collaborate with the likes of Bing Crosby, so they weren't like some niche musical dudes. They were pretty big. But unfortunately, after the 1940s, you can see that the popularity of the ocarina did start to diminish, and it got pretty low in the 60s and 70s. However, in the late 70s and early 80s, there was a big spike, which peaked in 1980. This is thanks to the godfather of the modern ocarina community, Nomura Sojiro. You can learn more about him in my video on why Japan loves ocarinas, but basically he and other musicians are responsible for popularizing ocarinas in East Asia in the 80s. And because of that, ocarinas started to appear in a lot of media in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, like Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, Dragon Ball Z: Wrath of the Dragon, My Neighbor Totoro. And post 1990, we can't use the Ngram to tell the story of the ocarina anymore. That's because the term has been co-opted by Legend of Zelda: The Ocarina of Time. And because the Ngram only accounts for the usage of a word, we cannot use the term recorder to do the same thing for that instrument, because there's a billion things the term recorder can refer to. But with all this data and history in mind, why are ocarinas so niche? I would argue that the main reason the ocarina has remained niche is due to its arch enemy, the recorder. First, just like doing anything, even like making content in the same niche as someone else will leave you in that person's shadow, the same goes for musical instruments. Recorders have been around since the Middle Ages in Europe. And though ocarinas have been around in some way, shape, or form for over 10,000 years in Asia and South America, modern music has a very European bias, and the modern ocarina was only invented in 1853. So in terms of European music, the recorder has nearly 1,000 years of a head start over the ocarina. So in terms of history, recorders win. Next, by their function as an instrument, recorders and ocarinas are very similar, if not identical in how they're used in like a group ensemble performance. But on that note, recorders do have some advantages over ocarinas. Recorders have access to multiple octaves for similar fingerings, just like other flutes, whereas ocarinas only have one note per fingering. This makes ocarinas easier to play for beginners, but recorders have a higher ceiling for what you can achieve with a single instrument. And on top of that, recorders and ocarinas have a very similar sweet sound. And last, I'll paint a picture. This instrument typically comes in many ranges, from bass to alto to soprano, and they're generally intended to be played in ensembles, usually of that same instrument in different ranges. If this made you think of ocarinas and ocarina septets, you are right. But guess what? Recorders do this too. Recorders are also played in ensembles of recorders in different ranges. I prefer the sound of ocarinas over that of recorders, and ocarinas are generally easier to learn and play than recorders. But in this case, recorders had the niche that ocarinas have first, and are a little bit more versatile as instruments in general. So unfortunately, by musical function, recorders win here as well. Last, let's compare the marketing of each instrument. In terms of modern media, ocarinas do have their big elephant in the room of Legend of Zelda: The Ocarina of Time, as well as Animal Crossing: New Horizons within the last couple years. But if you broaden your marketing scope, recorders have an even larger, even more capitalistic elephant in the room. Recorders are taught in schools. Almost everyone I know had recorder classes in their elementary school. I had recorder classes in my elementary school. These function as like an intro to music to get kids more interested in pursuing music and playing in band in middle school. Though this kind of has tarnished the image of the recorder as like a kiddie instrument, at least in terms of how a lot of people perceive it, I would wager that because of this product placement in schools, over 80% of Americans and Europeans would probably know what a recorder is, whereas only maybe 10% would know what the ocarina is. And for the most part, I am an ocarina channel, so this is not ocarina slander. The ocarina does do some things better. I think it does have a generally more expressive sound than recorders. Comparably, ocarinas are far easier to learn because you don't have to worry about losing your octave, which is a big problem for why kids sound horrible when they play the recorder. And multi-chamber ocarinas achieve that exact same multi-octave larger range purpose without having that weird breath control issue of jumping octaves on the same fingering. Ocarinas are also generally a little bit smaller and more portable. They have a more pocketable shape compared to how long recorders are, and they easily fit into most bags. And I prefer the sound of the ocarina just in general, but there is a lot of amazing recorder performances out there. So this isn't recorder slander either, I just prefer the ocarina. But the recorder isn't the only reason the ocarina has not gained a foothold in the cultural zeitgeist. That's a big word. For example, ocarinas have a really hard time to play dynamics, that is like playing softer or louder without losing their tuning. Because you have to adjust your fingering, with the ocarina, let's just take this note C. If I blow more to play louder, it'll become sharp. And if I blow less to play softer, it'll become flat. Other instruments circumvent these dynamic issues where you can play louder without losing tuning. On the ocarina, if I want to play the same C softly, I would need to play like a C sharp and then underblow it to get that C. Or if I want to play the C loudly, I would have to play like a B and then overblow it to get a louder C. I don't have a tuning thing on hand right now, but those are close to the actual C. Because of this limitation with dynamics, it's really hard to fit an ocarina into an orchestra, but recorders do have this exact same tuning problem. So basically, ocarinas would only make sense as like a soloist instrument. But even then, a recorder will typically have those solos, because they're similarly expressive as ocarinas, though ocarinas are a little bit more expressive, and they have a very similar sound, but with generally a bit more range. But on that note of solos being played by a very expressive instrument, you know what else occupies that niche beyond ocarinas and recorders? The human voice. For For very many songs where it could make sense to have an ocarina or a recorder as the soloist in an orchestral piece, it would probably be more reasonable to just make that solo a vocal solo. And you get the bonus of adding lyrics as well. But again, this may sound like me calling the ocarina a useless instrument or something that you can't be played seriously, but look at my channel. Half of everything I talk about is ocarinas trying to get people more interested in learning them and knowing what to do once they have them. Ocarinas, like any instrument, have their limitations, but many of these can be circumvented. And regardless of those limitations, the ocarina is my favorite instrument. It is extremely worthwhile for someone to learn, and I have seen the absolute heights musicians have had of using it as a serious instrument. But back to the last reason why the ocarina is so niche and obscure. Finally, because of all these issues the ocarina has compared to the recorder, and its difficulty to be used in orchestral performances, ocarinas have a general lack of establishment, and this is the biggest thing holding it back. Like, you can probably get in-person recorder, guitar, ukulele lessons in your city, but if you want to get an ocarina lesson, you probably have to find somebody online, and there's not many of them in the first place. And in other establishments, most universities probably have some like Baroque ensemble that features the recorder, but in most university music programs, there's nowhere for the ocarina to fit in unless you build a space for it. Almost every music store you go to will have guitars, recorders, or your typical orchestral instruments like trumpets and flutes. But they probably won't have ocarinas, and if they do have one, it'll probably be a really cheap plastic one. Because the ocarina is so niche, it lacks establishment in society, outside of places like Japan, South Korea, and parts of Italy. And because the ocarina lacks establishment, it remains niche. It's a feedback loop that we can change. So how can we popularize the ocarina? Many people in the ocarina community have very different views about this, balancing popularizing the instrument with also the image of a video game or non-serious kiddie instrument. Like, we have seen that recorders are generally viewed by the public as like a kiddie instrument or a starter instrument. And we don't want that for the ocarina, but you know what? People know what a recorder is. And there are a lot more recorder players than ocarina players. We also don't want the ocarina to be forever tied to gaming, but we also can't reject that most people know the ocarina because of Legend of Zelda. That's how I know the ocarina. With that in mind, I have 3 points for what we can do together to help popularize the ocarina. First, campaign for more schools to use ocarinas in their music programs. My friends Ocarina Owl and David Eric Ramos have already contributed to this a lot. And some schools do use ocarinas instead of recorders. And if the goal for recorders in elementary schools is to get more kids interested in music, if ocarinas are easier to learn, more kids will probably be interested in music because they'll feel more confident in their abilities. So I think schools are one of the biggest opportunities for popularizing ocarinas. Next, we can try to get ocarinas featured in more media. You saw that spike in Google Trends after Freckled Zelda's America's Got Talent performance. Featuring the ocarina works, especially when you have amazing performances. So whether that's getting the ocarina more mainstream attention, writing more orchestral music to feature ocarinas as soloists or even parts of the orchestra, finding more ways to feature ocarinas in like movie soundtracks, stuff like that, or doing what I and other creators do on YouTube, TikTok, and other places. Featuring the ocarina works. The more visible the ocarina is, the higher the heights achieved by ocarinists, and the more accessible educational resources are, the more mainstream the ocarina will become. So, as the popularity of the ocarina could grow, we also must grow the infrastructure of the ocarina community. I'm gonna put my business hat on. In marketing, there's a concept called the user journey. It's 5 steps going from awareness to consideration to conversion or purchase to retention and eventually advocacy. And advocacy is what leads to more awareness and repeats the cycle. And I think for just about every step, there is something we could improve. Like, if we make more people aware about the ocarina such that they consider buying one, people need to know the right ocarinas to purchase, like avoid the crappy ones on Amazon. There are some good ones on Amazon, but you get what I mean. Then if people purchase the ocarina, we need more areas where they can be retained into the community, or as ocarinists in general. We can develop that retention with more resources ranging from beginner through advanced levels. Whether that's more ocarina content on the internet, more advanced ocarina method books, or more variety and difficulty levels of ocarina music in general. And then with that retention, we can develop advocates for the ocarina. Those people start performing, writing music, recommending the instrument, making content online about it, like me, or doing something else to enthusiastically share the instrument. For most people, that ocarina user journey stops at purchase. With all the crappy ocarinas on Amazon, people might give up because the instrument they get sucks. And with how fragmented resources are, many people never get to the point of playing proficiently and wanting to share it, even if they have a good instrument. And then a lot of people people who do get good and love the Ocarina completely keep it to themselves. And this prevents the positive feedback loop of advocacy leading to more awareness. Strong advocates for the Ocarina are what drive awareness in the first place. And we could all be better advocates and do better to help make more advocates in the world. And that's exactly why I make my content. To help people make the right Ocarina purchase, to help point them towards the right resources to improve their skills, and to eventually build more advocacy around Ocarinas. Eventually, we could transform the Ocarina from a niche instrument to something far more normal in society. So what can you do to help? If I have helped you on your Ocarina journey, the biggest thing you can do is simply be an advocate for the instrument. Post Ocarina videos to TikTok, maybe write some music, share educational Ocarina content, like mine. And if you don't want to put yourself out there, if it's just too personal of a thing to share your music, always engage with the Ocarina content that you see from the creators you want to support. Leave likes, subscribe to creators, leave comments on their videos, watch to the end, watch multiple videos in one viewing session. The YouTube algorithm promotes content that gets more engagement and results in longer viewing sessions. So if you engage with Ocarina content more and watch multiple videos in one sitting, you're helping promote Ocarina content into the YouTube algorithm, which helps promote Ocarinas in general. This applies to TikTok too. The Ocarina may be niche, but we have the tools to help it grow. And if you want more educational Ocarina content, I am putting my full Ocarina playlist right here. Make that long viewing session. I'm also streaming more on twitch.tv/Andy Cormier, so check me out there as well. There will definitely be some Ocarina stuff going on there, among other things. Otherwise, leave a like, subscribe for more, comment how you will help support the Ocarina, watch that playlist next, and I'll see you next time. Happy tootin'!